Marcus Chen had always been different from the other kids in his small Montana town. While they played football and basketball, he spent hours in his backyard with a simple wooden bow his grandfather had made him. The neighbors often heard the steady thunk of arrows hitting the old hay bales he used for practice. Day after day, rain or shine, Marcus would draw back that bowstring and let arrow after arrow fly toward his targets. His classmates at Roosevelt High School didn't understand his passion. During lunch breaks, when everyone gathered to talk about sports or video games, Marcus would sit quietly in the corner, sketching bow designs in his notebook or reading about famous archers throughout history. The other students found this strange and began making jokes about his hobby. "Look at Marcus with his toy bow," they would whisper in the hallways. "What does he think this is? Medieval times?" The laughter followed him everywhere he went. Even some teachers seemed amused when he asked permission to start an archery club at school. The principal politely declined, saying there wasn't enough student interest for such an unusual activity. But Marcus never let the mockery stop him. His grandfather, a World War II veteran, had taught him that true skill comes from dedication and practice, not from seeking approval from others. Every afternoon after school, Marcus would head straight to his backyard range. He had set up targets at various distances, starting at 20 yards and extending all the way to 80 yards. His neighbors thought he was wasting his time, but Marcus knew something they didn't understand. Years of consistent practice had developed his skills far beyond what anyone realized. His draw was smooth and controlled, his stance perfect, and his aim incredibly precise. He could hit a playing card at 50 yards 9 times out of 10. By the time he turned 17, Marcus could consistently group arrows within a 2-inch circle at distances that would challenge experienced hunters. The local sporting goods store owner, Mr. Peterson, was one of the few people who recognized Marcus's talent. Occasionally, Marcus would visit the shop to buy arrows or string wax, and Mr. Peterson would ask about his progress. One day, while Marcus was examining some new broadheads, Mr. Peterson mentioned something that would change everything. "You know, Marcus, there's a big archery competition coming up in Billings next month. It's called the Rocky Mountain Challenge, and archers come from all over the western states to compete. The winner gets a $5,000 scholarship and a new compound bow worth $2,000. Marcus's eyes lit up with interest, but then his expression grew uncertain. "I've never competed before, Mr. Peterson. I just practice by myself." The older man smiled knowingly. "Son, I've been selling archery equipment for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of archers. From what I hear about your backyard sessions, you might surprise yourself. The competition has different categories, including traditional bow, which is what you've been using." That evening, Marcus discussed the competition with his grandfather. The old man listened carefully as Marcus explained his doubts and fears about competing against experienced archers who had probably won many tournaments. "Marcus," his grandfather said, placing a weathered hand on his shoulder, "skill isn't about how many trophies you have on your shelf. It's about how well you can perform when it matters most. Those kids at school laugh because they don't understand dedication, but real archers will recognize talent when they see it." After much consideration, Marcus decided to enter the competition. He sent in his registration form and began preparing more intensively than ever before. He researched the competition format and learned that it would include multiple rounds at different distances, culminating in a final challenge that tested accuracy under pressure. The weeks leading up to the competition were filled with doubt and excitement. Marcus continued practicing daily, but now with a specific goal in mind. He worked on controlling his breathing, maintaining consistency in his form, and building mental focus. His grandfather often watched from the porch, offering occasional tips, but mostly just observing with pride. Meanwhile, at school, word spread about Marcus's plan to compete in the archery tournament. The reaction was predictably dismissive. Students laughed openly when they heard about it during announcements, and several athletes made jokes about Robin Hood thinking he could win real competitions. "Marcus is going to embarrass himself," one basketball player said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He's going to show up with his wooden bow against people with professional equipment and get demolished." But Marcus had learned to tune out the negativity. He knew his equipment was simple compared to modern compound bows with all their technological advantages, but he also knew that accuracy ultimately came from the archer, not the bow. His grandfather had taught him that lesson many years ago. The night before leaving for Billings, Marcus carefully packed his gear. His wooden bow, crafted with love by his grandfather's hands, might not look impressive next to the expensive equipment others would bring, but it was perfectly balanced and familiar in his hands. He selected his best arrows, each one he had carefully straightened and fletched himself. As he prepared for bed, Marcus felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. Tomorrow, he would face archers who had been competing for years, many with sponsorships and professional coaching. He would be the unknown teenager from a small Montana town, carrying a simple wooden bow and wearing his grandfather's old leather arm guard. But Marcus also carried something his critics couldn't see: thousands of hours of dedicated practice, unwavering focus, and the quiet confidence that comes from truly mastering a skill. The kids who laughed at him had no idea what he was capable of achieving. The drive to Billings took 3 hours, and Marcus spent most of it staring out the window at the rolling Montana landscape. His grandfather drove, occasionally humming old songs, but mostly letting Marcus process his thoughts in peaceful silence. When they finally arrived at the competition venue, Marcus felt his stomach flutter with nervous energy. The Rocky Mountain archery range was far more impressive than anything Marcus had ever seen. Multiple shooting lines stretched across perfectly manicured fields, with targets set at precise distances. Colorful banners fluttered in the morning breeze, and dozens of competitors were already warming up, their expensive compound bows glinting in the sunlight. As Marcus and his grandfather walked toward the registration table, they passed groups of serious-looking archers discussing strategy and adjusting their equipment. Many wore matching team uniforms with sponsor logos, and their bow cases looked like they cost more than Marcus's family spent on groceries in a month. "Look at that kid with the wooden bow," someone whispered loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Is he lost or something?" Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment, but his grandfather squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "Remember what we talked about, son. Let your arrows do the talking." At the registration table, a friendly woman handed Marcus his competitor number and a schedule of events. "First time competing?" she asked with a warm smile. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Well, good luck. The traditional bow category has some excellent competitors this year. You'll be shooting with some very experienced archers." As they walked toward the practice range, Marcus got his first good look at his competition. There was Jake Morrison, a 25-year-old from Colorado, who had won the traditional category 3 years running. His longbow was a work of art, made from exotic woods and decorated with intricate carvings. Near him stood Sarah Williams from Wyoming, whose recurve bow technique was so smooth it looked effortless. Then there was David "Bear" Thompson, a massive man from Idaho whose reputation preceded him. Bear had been competing in traditional archery for over 15 years and was known for his incredible consistency at long distances. His presence alone seemed to intimidate other competitors. Marcus found an empty spot on the practice line and began assembling his gear. His simple wooden bow looked almost primitive next to the sophisticated equipment surrounding him. Several competitors glanced over with curiosity, and Marcus could see the mixture of amusement and pity in their expressions. "Hey there, young man," Bear Thompson called out in a booming voice. "That's quite an interesting bow you've got there. Did you make it yourself?" "My grandfather made it," Marcus replied quietly, not sure if the question was meant as encouragement or mockery. "Well, that's something special then," Bear said, his tone becoming more respectful. "Traditional craftsmanship is becoming rare these days. Mind if I take a closer look?" Marcus hesitated, but then handed over his bow. Bear examined it carefully, running his fingers along the smooth wood and testing the string tension. "This is beautiful work," he said genuinely. "The balance is perfect, and you can see the care that went into every detail. Your grandfather is quite the craftsman." "He learned from his father," Marcus explained, feeling slightly more comfortable. "The bow is made from yew wood that grew on our property." Bear nodded approvingly and handed the bow back. "Well, son, you've got a fine weapon there. Now let's see what you can do with it." Marcus strung his bow and selected an arrow from his quiver. The practice targets were set at 40 yards, a distance he could handle easily during his backyard sessions. But now, with dozens of experienced archers watching, everything felt different. His hands trembled slightly as he knocked the arrow and drew back the string. He took a deep breath, focused on the target, and released. The arrow flew straight and true, hitting just outside the center ring. Not bad, but not impressive either. A few polite nods from nearby competitors, but Marcus could see they weren't particularly concerned about him as competition. Over the next hour, Marcus continued practicing, gradually settling into his familiar rhythm. His groups tightened, and his confidence slowly returned. By the time the practice session ended, he was consistently hitting the center ring, though he still felt overshadowed by the smooth perfection of the more experienced archers. The opening ceremony featured speeches from sponsors and local officials, but Marcus barely heard the words. His mind was focused on the competition ahead. The traditional bow category would begin with qualifying rounds at 30, 40, and 50 yards, with 6 arrows at each distance. The top 8 scores would advance to the elimination rounds. When his name was called for the first group, Marcus walked to the shooting line with his heart pounding. To his left stood Jake Morrison, the 3-time champion, and to his right was a veteran archer from Utah who had competed internationally. Marcus felt completely out of his element. "First arrow on the line," the rangemaster called out. "You have 2 minutes to shoot." Marcus knocked his first arrow and drew back the string. The familiar weight and balance of his grandfather's bow provided comfort in this moment of pressure. He aimed carefully at the 30-yard target, released, and watched his arrow sink into the gold center ring. "Good shot," Jake Morrison said quietly beside him. Marcus glanced over, surprised by the encouragement from someone he'd expected to be aloof. The remaining arrows at 30 yards went well for Marcus. His grouping was tight, and his score was competitive with the other archers in his group. But he knew the real test would come at the longer distances, where small errors in form would be magnified. At 40 yards, Marcus maintained his consistency, though a couple of arrows drifted slightly to the right due to nervousness affecting his release. Still, his cumulative score kept him in contention for advancement to the elimination rounds. The 50-yard targets looked impossibly small from the shooting line. At this distance, Marcus was shooting farther than many of his backyard practice sessions. The wind had picked up slightly, adding another variable to consider. As he prepared for his first shot at 50 yards, Marcus heard some competitors behind him discussing strategy in hushed tones. "The kid's doing better than expected," someone said, "but 50 yards will separate the rookies from the real archers." Marcus tried to block out the comments and focus on his technique. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Trust your training, trust your equipment, and trust yourself." He drew back the string, found his anchor point, and released. The arrow seemed to hang in the air forever before thudding into the target. Not a perfect shot, but still in the scoring rings. The crowd of spectators that had gathered began paying more attention to the unknown teenager who was holding his own against seasoned competitors. By the end of the qualifying rounds, Marcus had not only advanced to the elimination rounds but had finished 4th overall, ahead of several archers who had been competing for years. The whispers from the crowd had changed from amusement to genuine interest. As he walked off the line, Bear Thompson approached with a grin. "Well, young man, it looks like that wooden bow of yours has some magic in it after all." Marcus smiled back, feeling a surge of confidence he had never experienced before. "We're just getting started," he replied, surprised by his own boldness. The elimination rounds would be different, though. Instead of shooting at stationary targets with predictable conditions, the final challenges would test accuracy under pressure in ways Marcus had never experienced. And tomorrow would bring the ultimate test that would either validate his years of solitary practice or expose him as just a lucky amateur. The second day of competition dawned crisp and clear, with just enough wind to make things interesting. Marcus had spent a restless night in the motel, replaying every shot from the qualifying rounds and trying to prepare mentally for what lay ahead. His grandfather had ordered room service breakfast and insisted Marcus eat properly, despite his nervous stomach. "Today is when champions are made," the old man said over coffee. "Not by the fanciest equipment or the biggest reputation, but by who can perform when everything is on the line." The elimination rounds began with head-to-head matches at 60 yards. Marcus was paired against Tony Rodriguez, a seasoned competitor from Arizona who had placed second the previous year. The format was simple. Each archer would shoot 3 arrows, and the highest total score would advance. As they took their positions on the line, Tony glanced over at Marcus with a mixture of respect and confusion. "I have to admit, kid, I didn't expect to see you still here today. That old bow of yours must have some serious mojo." Marcus nodded politely, but kept his focus on the distant target. 60 yards was at the very edge of his comfort zone, a distance he had only recently begun practicing consistently. The target looked impossibly small, and the wind was gusting unpredictably across the range. Tony shot first, his 3 arrows forming a tight group in the upper portion of the target. His score of 26 out of a possible 30 was excellent, and he looked satisfied as he stepped back from the line. Marcus approached the shooting position, with his grandfather's voice echoing in his mind. Breathe, focus, trust. He knocked his first arrow and drew back the familiar yew-wood bow. The string came back smoothly to his anchor point, and he held steady despite the wind. His first arrow caught the edge of the center ring, a solid 8 points. Not perfect, but a good start. His second arrow drifted slightly in a gust of wind, scoring 7 points. Going into his final shot, Marcus needed at least 11 points to tie Tony's score. The pressure was immense. Spectators had gathered behind the shooting line, and Marcus could feel their eyes on him. This was the moment that would either prove his backyard practice had prepared him for real competition or expose him as just a lucky amateur. Marcus drew back his final arrow, found his sight picture, and released. The arrow seemed to cut through the wind resistance and buried itself deep in the center of the target. A perfect 10. The crowd erupted in cheers as Marcus's total score of 25 fell just 1 point short of Tony's 26. He had lost the match. But his performance had earned something more valuable than advancement: respect from the archery community. "Hell of a shot, kid," Tony said, extending his hand with genuine admiration. "You've got a real gift. Keep working at it, and you'll be winning these things soon." Marcus felt disappointed about not advancing further, but also proud of how well he had performed. As he walked off the line, several competitors approached to congratulate him on his showing. Even Jake Morrison, the 3-time champion, stopped to chat. "You know," Jake said, "I've been watching you shoot, and you've got something special. Your form is textbook perfect, and you have incredible natural ability. Have you ever considered getting some coaching and upgrading your equipment?" Before Marcus could respond, the range master made an announcement that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special exhibition challenge this afternoon. Any archer who wishes to participate can attempt the Thunder Ridge shot." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Marcus had never heard of the Thunder Ridge shot, but from the reactions of the experienced archers, it was clearly something significant. Bear Thompson leaned over to explain. "The Thunder Ridge shot is a legendary challenge they only do at special events. It's a shot at 120 yards to a target the size of a dinner plate. They say it's the same distance military snipers train at. Only a handful of archers have ever made it successfully. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. 120 yards was more than twice the distance of his longest practice shots. And with traditional equipment, it seemed almost impossible. Yet something deep inside him wanted to attempt it. "You thinking about trying it?" Bear asked, noticing the look in Marcus's eyes. "I don't know," Marcus replied honestly. "That's so much farther than I've ever shot before." "Sometimes," Bear said thoughtfully, "the biggest achievements come from attempting things that seem impossible. And you've already surprised everyone here, including yourself." Over the next hour, several of the top competitors attempted the Thunder Ridge shot. Jake Morrison's arrows fell short by 10 yards. Sarah Williams managed to reach the target area but missed wide. Even Bear Thompson, with all his experience, couldn't quite achieve the distance and accuracy required. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that the Thunder Ridge shot was living up to its legendary difficulty. Archer after archer failed to even reach the distant target, let alone hit it accurately. Finally, with most of the experienced competitors having already tried and failed, Marcus approached the range master. "I'd like to attempt the shot," he said quietly. The range master looked surprised. "Son, this is an extremely difficult shot. Archers with decades of experience haven't been able to make it today." "I understand," Marcus replied, "but I'd like to try." Word spread quickly through the crowd that the unknown teenager with the wooden bow was going to attempt the Thunder Ridge shot. Spectators gathered along the fence line, many of them curious to see how the young archer would handle such an impossible challenge. Marcus walked to the shooting line and looked downrange at the tiny target 120 yards away. It was barely visible, looking no larger than a coin from his position. The wind was steady but manageable, and the afternoon light was perfect. As he prepared his equipment, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. All the pressure, all the expectations, all the doubt seemed to fade away. This wasn't about proving himself to anyone else anymore. This was about seeing how far his years of dedicated practice could take him. He selected his straightest arrow, one he had crafted himself from premium carbon with perfect balance. Drawing back the yew-wood bow, Marcus raised his aim point significantly higher than normal to account for the arrow's trajectory over such a long distance. The crowd fell silent as Marcus held his draw, wind gauging the conditions and visualizing the arrow's path. In that moment, everything his grandfather had taught him came together: patience, focus, trust in his equipment, and unwavering belief in his ability. Marcus released the string, and the arrow arced high into the Montana sky. Time seemed suspended as it reached its peak and began its descent toward the distant target. The crowd held its collective breath, watching the tiny projectile streak through the air. The arrow struck the target dead center with a resounding thunk that echoed across the silent range. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then the range master raised his binoculars to confirm what everyone had witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in amazement, "we have a successful Thunder Ridge shot." The crowd exploded in cheers and applause. Competitors who had failed the same shot earlier rushed forward to congratulate Marcus, their faces showing genuine awe and respect. Bear Thompson lifted Marcus off his feet in a massive bear hug, while Jake Morrison shook his head in disbelief. "In 20 years of competition," Jake said, "I have never seen anything like that. You just made a shot that most professional archers can't make, and you did it with traditional equipment." As news of the impossible shot spread throughout the archery community, Marcus realized his life had changed forever. The kids at school who had laughed at his bow skills would hear a very different story when he returned home. But more importantly, Marcus had proven to himself that dedication, practice, and belief could overcome any obstacle. His grandfather's simple wooden bow had just delivered a shot that would be talked about for years to come, and the young archer who had been dismissed as different had shown the world what true skill looked like.